Sorry, Stacy's next or and she has her computer on, so that's why I was distracted. Well, thank you everyone for attending today. I'm going to introduce Sheila Eason. She is going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and microaggressions in the workplace, and really help us to understand how we can all, maybe we're doing things that we don't know we're even doing or saying. And I think it's going to be really helpful for all of us to go through this training. We are also going to have it, she's recording it for us as well. So anyone that wasn't able to attend today, or maybe they're out of the office, we will be able to have them do the training at a later date. So with that being said, Sheila, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's right at noon, and so we're ready to get started here today on this bright and sunny day. I'm glad to meet you all. I see a couple familiar faces, and so it's nice to be with you all this afternoon. So we're talking about microaggressions in the workplace today, and some of you might recognize my title, and I'm probably dating myself. But years ago, there was a television show called Family Matters, and there was a character on that show called Steve Urkel. And so he would always say, "Did I say that?" And so I thought that, that was a fitting title for what we're talking about today, because microaggressions really is about the things that we say as well as what we do. And and excuse me, if you see me looking away for a second, I'm just still admitting people. So we want to make sure that we get everyone admitted into this session. Many times people commit microaggressions without meaning to. It's based on biases and assumptions that people make about others. And you know what, folks, I'm hearing a little bit of feedback. And so if you're not speaking, if you would be so kind as to mute your phones, I would appreciate that. But microaggressions, again, they're often committed without meaning, but they're based on biases and assumptions and stereotypes that we make about others that sometimes we don't realize that we're holding. And microaggressions are often referred to as small or micro, but especially when they're not committed on purpose. But the reality is that they have a cumulative effect. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But they have a cumulative effect. They compound on each other when someone's experiences them on an ongoing basis, sometimes multiple times throughout the day. So what this training is designed to do is to really provide you with an understanding about what microaggressions are, what they look like, what they feel like, as well as recommendations on how to reduce the prevalence of microaggressions in the workplace. And so this is just a little bit about me. I believe you have the slides, and so I'm not going to go over. I'm not the type of person to just, talk too much about myself. The only thing that I will say is that I'm the founder and CEO of Elevate People Solutions. We are a consultancy. We provide training and leadership development and coaching. So that's enough about me. All right. So one of the things that I understand, I do a lot of diversity training. And one of the things that I understand that anytime we talk about issues related to diversity, inclusion, equity, it's with the understanding that people come into the session with a variety of feelings. Sometimes people are feeling a little bit nervous because they don't know what to expect. Sometimes people are feeling anxious because they don't know, what am I supposed to say? And if I say something, will that be held against me? If I'm honest or if I speak my truth. Some people are concerned, and there's a host of other feelings that people may have. Some people are feeling a little bit uncomfortable because the diverse topic of diversity sometimes causes us to experience some discomfort. And what I will say is, however you're feeling coming into this session, it's completely okay. What I would like to do is to invite you all, and I do use the chat. This is one of the ways that I engage with you. So I want you to type in the chat how you're feeling coming into this session. Are you excited? Are you nervous? Are you curious? Are you open? Let me know how you're feeling in the chat, please. And I don't see any comments yet, but I'm sure. Okay, they're coming. Billy says interested. Alexa says interested and open. All right. Matt says excited, interested, open to learn. Excellent. Open to new ideas. Kelly says, Sam says a little anxious, but also excited. And Sam, you know what? Like I said, however you're feeling is okay. And sometimes there is that anxiety coming into these sessions because maybe you're not real certain what the objectives are, which we'll talk about, or what the outcome is going to be. But I hope that as we go through the rest of the training here today, that you will sense some comfort. Paige says interested and open. Carol says interested. I'm seeing a lot of folks saying interested. New ideas. Yeah, I got you, Kelly. So yes, thank you. So I appreciate that you all are open and interested in learning. And that's what this experience is going to be. And let me say this, and Stephanie says excited to learn and help change any behaviors that are inappropriate. And Stephanie, that is the one of the things that we are going to focus on here today. So thank you all. Our learning objectives are very simple. We're going to talk about, describe, and define microaggressions, and then we're going to understand how microaggressions impact individuals and the work environment. Because make no mistake about it, while the microaggressions may be committed against an individual or groups of individuals, it has far-reaching effects on an organizational level. And then we're going to talk about some solutions through discussions and looking at some scenarios and asking you, how would you respond if this particular situation occurred? So briefly, I just want to talk about some conversation guidelines. Again, as I said, and Jim says, excited to learn and understand. Thank you, Jim. I'm excited that you're here. So some conversation guidelines, just stay engaged with us. My sessions are interactive. I give you all opportunity to talk, especially when we get to the scenarios. And so just stay engaged. Feel free to speak your truth. And your truth may be different from someone else's. And I want to let you know that that is okay, because if it's your truth, then you need to, feel comfortable stating that. But I also ask that when you speak your truth, that you also listen to others for understanding, listen to understand their point of view as well. Experience discomfort. Again, I already mentioned that even if you're uncomfortable, as we go through some of the scenarios or as we talk about microaggressions, it's okay to be uncomfortable. Respectfully challenge, I talked about that. And just participate to your fullest and be authentic. Again, as I said, one of the ways that I like to engage you is in the chat. So feel free to utilize the chat. If you have questions, you can pop those in the chat, or you can feel free to unmute. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So let's say you are a female and your skills or intelligence have been underestimated and you're assumed to not be ambitious. Or let's say you're an older, more seasoned worker and colleagues speak to you more slowly or even more loudly than they would their younger peers. Or they automatically assume that you're uncomfortable with technology without even asking you. Or perhaps someone has failed to learn how to pronounce or continues to mispronounce your name after you have corrected them several times. Or maybe it's just that people make assumptions about you and your background. They look at you and they assume where you're from, where you grew up, or what your background or ethnicity is. These are all examples of microaggressions in the workplace. And microaggressions, as you see on the screen, are everyday verbal and nonverbal slights or snubs. And they're frequently not intended to cause harm or hurt feelings. So they're, sometimes even meant to be complimentary. But the impact that people experience is hurt and harm. Because what microaggressions do is they communicate negative or hostile messages that are based solely on an individual's membership in a particular group. For instance, whether it's their race or ethnicity, their gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability, it crosses the wide spectrum of diversity. Now, I want to share with you a few points about microaggressions. The first one is that microaggressions are an outgrowth of unconscious bias. And when we're talking about unconscious bias, what we mean is it describes when we have certain attitudes towards people, or we associate certain stereotypes with individuals without our conscious knowledge. So say, for example, you see someone who looks to be older, looks to be, maybe perhaps in their 50s or their 60s. And our minds begin to unconsciously make assumptions about them, or we see someone of a particular race, and then our minds begin to unconsciously make assumptions or stereotypes about them. The next thing is that I'm often asked this, and so I like to clarify it. People say, well, if microaggressions are so harmful, why are they called microaggressions? Well, understand that the micro prefix isn't a measurement of the size of the slight. What it means is that on the micro level, it just means that it's directed towards individuals. So again, it's very important that you understand it. The micro doesn't mean the size or how harmful it was. When we talk about macro, it just refers to social institutions or structures, so like an organization. The next thing is, it's important to note that while microaggressions are generally discussed from the perspective of race and racism, and in fact, when the term was coined, it was coined out of research based on race and racism. But now it has evolved to mean that anyone who is a member of a marginalized group can be a target of a microaggression. I mean, microaggressions happen towards women on the basis of gender. They happen directed at individuals based on their LGBTQ status, disabilities, religious minorities, and so on and so forth. It's also important to understand that microaggressions are most often committed by individuals who are unaware that they're engaging in microaggressions. They believe they're being complimentary. For instance, to say to someone, ethnic or racial minority, oh, you speak English well, or you're so articulate. In the mind of the individual who's saying that, they believe that that is a compliment, but to the person that is receiving that, it's not a compliment. And even though the recipient is the one who may feel the message is hostile, it's an obligation of every one of us on this call to make sure that we avoid using language that could be perceived as microaggressive. And then lastly, while these everyday occurrences may on the surface appear quite harmless, sometimes people even refer to them as small slights. Researchers have linked the continuous exposure to microaggressions to things such as depression or anxiety and diminished psychological well-being. And we'll talk more specifically about some of the other effects. Now, I want to, and this is the part of the training where I'm doing most of the heavy lifting. So I'm doing a lot of talking right now, but it won't be like this for the entire time that we're here together. But I just need to lay a foundation. So there's 3 types of microaggressions. The first type are called micro assaults. And again, the term micro shouldn't be equated to the size of the microaggression, but it just means individuals. It's on the basis of individuals. So when we're talking about micro assaults, the best way to describe this is just plain old-fashioned racism. So this is where individuals are deliberately and consciously and intentionally doing or saying something to hurt or oppress or discriminate others. You see some examples listed here. whether it's individuals using races, epithets, name calling, invoking certain images of marginalized groups, and so on and so forth. But again, this is where there is very much deliberate intent to cause harm. The next type are the micro insults. And these are behavioral verbal remarks that convey rudeness or insensitivity. And the effect of them is that they demean a person's heritage or their identity. Now, these type of microaggressions are the ones that are not intentional. And again, they may seem complimentary. And these occur because they're typically due to underlying biases and prejudices that people hold that are really outside of their awareness. They're not really fully aware that they're operating at a level of bias. So I want to show you quickly three very short videos that were produced by MTV as part of their they wrote out a campaign against bias. And so they produced these very short videos. And I want you to take a look at those.
It is an ethos that is echoed in countless political speeches, works of literature, and films.
Sounds great, Diego.
Thank you.
You're so well spoken.
Thanks.
Where are your parents from again?
Guatemala. Why?
Because your English is so good.
My English is so good. I'm from here. I grew up speaking English and Spanish. Why don't people get that?
Hey, is that Cindy over there?
I don't know who that is.
Man, I can't tell Asians apart.
Can't tell Asians apart. I've been hearing that my whole life. That means you don't see me. We're not all the same, you know.
We gotta go.
Yeah, let's take a selfie first.
Hey, wanna be in the picture with us?
Sure. Mwah.
Great photo.
Flawless. You're so pretty for a dark girl.
Pretty for a dark girl. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Well, it's not, and it hurts that people don't think my skin color is beautiful.
Let's go.
Let's go.
All right, so I want to, I'm going to stop my share right here. I want to get some feedback from you all about those three videos. They were, 20, 30 seconds long. When you saw those videos, and based on what we've talked about so far, with respect to microaggressions and how sometimes people think that they're being complimentary, I'm interested in some feedback from you all. What was your overall impression when you saw those short videos? Did anyone find the messages in the videos were they shocking to you? Were they familiar to you? Kelly says it is very familiar. Okay, thank you, Kelly. What else? Jim says messages were very familiar. Okay. Any other thoughts? Kelly says it seems innocent but very hurtful to the person. Shauna says familiar. Yeah, and like I said, I want to pick up on Kelly's comment about it seems innocent but very hurtful to the person. And that's the very point of microaggressions, is that even though we think we're being complimentary, or even though we think, we're being nice to someone, we have to recognize the impact that it has. Jim says, have heard, seen in the news in Perrysburg. Yeah, you're right, Jim. They've had a number of issues recently. Roland says, I think the messages were powerful. Yes. Stephanie says, the people saying the insults did not realize they were being offensive and hurtful. And you're right, Stephanie. And you know what? Sometimes people say to me, or say to others after they've attended one of these trainings is, I feel like I can't say anything to anyone now. I don't want to offend them. And that is never the goal of these trainings. The goal of these trainings are to bring awareness. So sometimes when we don't know that we're causing harm, hopefully the revelation that our unintentional acts are causing harm will cause us to do different. Jim says terminated a school bus driver on a similar situation. Good for you, Jim. Good for you. And Shauna says, I have experience personally. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And so and to Shauna's point, it's really important for us to also acknowledge that we have some colleagues, amongst us, in the midst of us, who have either experienced these things on a regular basis. And so, that requires us to have some level of compassion. Now, the third type of microaggression is the microinvalidation. And these are communications or environmental cues that really exclude or negate or nullify someone's experience, particularly those who are members of a marginalized group. So it's as if saying, I don't see color, or, and what that does is it communicates, it intrinsically denies a person's racial experiences. Or if a colleague says to you, I felt uncomfortable in this situation. I felt like, this person made this comment to me, and it made me feel real uncomfortable. And then the person on the other end of that is saying, oh, you need to stop being so sensitive, or that's just, Peter, and Peter means no harm. That's another example of how you can invalidate and nullify someone's experience. Kelly says it's a power play meant to put people in their place or to show the power of dominance. Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Kelly, that's another effect of unconscious bias. So let me hear from you. I'm interested in hearing from some of you. But first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the Zoom rooms, because I know that sometimes people are a little bit more comfortable speaking in smaller groups, and then we'll come back together as a larger group. What I'd like for you to do is to describe a time that you experienced a microaggression. And what do you think was the underlying assumption? What do you think was the message that was really being conveyed? How did it make you feel? And so forth. So I'm going to give you, we have 18 people. So I'm going to put you in groups of 3, and then I'll give you about 2 minutes each. So 6 minutes total. And then I'll give you an opportunity to share, and then we'll bring you back into the larger group. All right. And make sure you do accept the invitation, and then I'll see you back on the other side. Welcome back, everyone.
We're the only ones in the. I need to learn how to use this. Okay, I see it now.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a nice time of sharing in your groups. Let me hear from you. Is there a group or an individual that would like to share a time when you had experienced a microaggression, and how did it make you feel?
I'll go just because I like to talk. But I think we've all experienced microaggressions some way, somehow in our lives. And it hits home because even though we like to couch it as unintentional, complimentary, it's still painful and it's still a power play. It is meant to demonstrate that person's power over you for whatever reason, and it can be couched in laughter, it can be couched as a joke, it can be as a gee, I really didn't mean it that way. But it's a power play. It's showing my power over you, and and we've all experienced it, and it's painful and puts you in your place.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Anyone else like to share? Rowan says, my microphone wasn't working. Sorry, group members. Our group discussed assumptions about where we live. Yes, yeah. Oh, you live there types of comments. Yeah, and Rowan, that can be from the perspective of if you live, in what is perceived as wealthy or the suburbs, or if you live in, more of the inner city or something. Oh, you live there. I didn't realize you lived there. And, so you're not real sure where that comment is coming from. Well, you're kind of sure, but yeah. Someone has a question. Jim. Yes, please, Jim.
Yeah, that's something that in our breakout session that we spoke of as well, is that as we look at different areas where kids have a need for us, and we talk amongst either out in the community or in a greater metropolitan area, sometimes people would just say, well, that doesn't make sense because the kids you serve should be here or living there, and it's the defining of saying that you can't just categorize and say, well, all kids that have a need live in a certain spot. It could be your next door neighbor, it could be everywhere, and so you have to accept and understand that where the need is where we have to go, and you can't define not just by your gender or sexual orientation or religious affiliation, ethnicity, it's also geographically. I mean, you can't just assume that, well, you live here, therefore you don't have a need. No, the need is everywhere.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Jim. I think what the pandemic has shown us is that need knows no bounds, right? Because my husband and I are friends with the director over at the Martin Luther King Kitchen for the Poor. And we were talking to him one day, and he was telling us that since the pandemic, that the need has just exponentially increased. and that they were receiving requests and visits from individuals who lived out in Perrysburg and out in Sylvania. And so because the pandemic didn't look at zip codes to determine how it was going to impact people, right? It just did what it did, and affected many people from all kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's an excellent point. Any other comments? Anyone else like to share?
We talked in our group about, we have seen and heard different aggressions against people, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but how to handle those situations.
Yes.
What's the best way to talk through it, or not call someone out, but how do we handle that, especially if it's a supervisor or someone who is in a position of power?
Yes, yeah, and we are absolutely going to get to that. And that takes us to our next point here, Stephanie. So let me just quickly go over some examples of microaggressions. There are behavioral, there are verbal, and there are environmental microaggressions. And here you see on the screen, there are some behavioral ones listed. So here, the first one is an assertive female leader is labeled as the B word, while her male counterpart is described as a forceful leader. So they engage in the same behavior. She's assertive, he's assertive, but she's described in a negative way and he is not. And that's with the assumption that women should be passive and allow men to be the decision makers. And let me say this, that the one thing about microaggressions is the impact is not just the microaggression itself, but it is the message, the hidden message. And so what you see here on the screen is not only what the microaggression is, but what is the message that is also being conveyed. So if people are using terms that exclude or degrade, women or members of the LGBTQ community, what that says is that the assumption is that the male experience is universal. So it's things simple as, and we don't always think about this, but how many of you, and you don't have to, raise your hand or anything, but how many of you have ever used the term you guys when you're in a group, like such as a setting here, and we have everybody on here and we say, hey guys, well, that is a term that excludes women, right? Or another term is if we use for the LGBTQ community, the terminology homosexual versus gay or lesbian, those types of things. A white person who grabs their purse or wallet as an African American or Latino approaches them. That's the assumption of criminality. There are lots and lots of verbal microaggressions. We've talked about a couple of them. You're so articulate, telling a woman to smile more. And the more and more I do this training, this microaggressions training, the more I recognize how much that one, telling a woman to smile more, actually occurs. And what it does is it reinforces the idea that women should always be grateful and happy and pleasant, and they should never experience a bad day. To a person with a disability, don't you miss X? And that's assuming that the person doesn't experience the same quality of life as an able-bodied person. And that's a very false assumption, and that we, should not make. Referring to marginalized groups as, hey, you people, or can't you people just get it right? Or can't you people just work harder or whatever? And it makes the imbalance of power very clear. To engage employee, you're just being paranoid. And that goes back to that micro invalidation that I talked about earlier. So it's denying the experience. And then environmental microaggressions, considering certain people to be of more value than others, just simply based on their ethnicity, or subtle systemic racism, such as when upper management or board of directors have no people of color. And what that conveys is you and your kind are not welcome here. And then there's the social or institutional, economic, political cues that communicate messages to marginalized groups. And again, the message is you don't belong here, you're not welcome here, you're not one of us, or you can only go so far here. So, and we'll get to kind of solutions in a second here, but I want to ask you a question. How do you think microaggressions impact the experience of employees? So think about, the staff there at the Boys and Girls Club. How do you think that experiencing these types of things impacts the employment experience of an employee? Well, for those of you who have experienced microaggressions, how has it impacted your employment experience?
I'll go.
Yeah.
I think it impacts the person by not feeling belonged or not wanting to continue to work at that work at that job just because of not feeling accepted.
Yeah, not feeling accepted, not feeling a sense of belonging. And as organizations are making it part of their strategy these days to create a more inclusive work environment, as I believe Anissa, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, hopefully.
It's Anissa, but you're fine.
Anissa. No. I want to make sure I see that Anissa, as Anissa was saying, that they don't feel like they belong there. Stephanie says frustrated, left out and angry. Marty says creates an uncomfortable environment. Billy says can be very awkward to witness. Absolutely. And so, Billy, we're going to talk about how observers, bystanders can intervene. What are some things that you can do when you witness it and it makes you feel uncomfortable? And then Sam says, not feeling valued or worth anything to the organization. Yes. And Kelly says, it creates a negative work environment and leads others to ganging up on the person. Yeah, it can absolutely do that, where you have that bullying effect within the organization. Did someone have a comment?
Yes.
Yes.
I think too, all of these answers too can lead up to a person not feeling safe.
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And as you see here on the screen, Anissa, it creates those psychological effects. And one of the things that particularly the leaders of the organization should do is to make sure that they are creating psychological safety for every employee. And so some of the psychological effects that people experience, one is called the imposter syndrome, where the individual feels insecure, undeserving. And even though they may have accomplished a lot in their life, because the microaggressions convey that they're not welcome or they don't belong, they feel unaccomplished. Another effect is what's called the stereotype threat, where an individual who is a member of a marginalized group has the fear of validating a particular stereotype. So the effect of that is that the person is not bringing their full self to work. So if they're afraid that, okay, well, if I say this or if I behave in this manner, then I'll be validating the stereotype that people already have of me. That's called stereotype threat. And then, as Anissa said, it amplifies feelings of alienation. Here, I'm not going to go through everything on this screen here because you see it listed here, and I believe you have a copy of the handouts, the slides. But just look at this list. The impact of microaggressive behavior can show up in a lot of different ways. And we've talked about some of these. So again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just look at the list and read it. Because, and this is particularly important for the leaders of the organization, because when we're talking about these effects, that it potentially affects job seekers and those who may be interested in working for the organization, workplace engagement, that it prevents people from being fully engaged within the organization. And another thing, that second to the last bullet, when people are constantly experiencing microaggressions or unconscious bias within the organization, they're not as willing to speak up. And you want that. You want diversity of thought. You want to hear from everyone. You want everyone to feel like that they can make contributions to the organization. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Oftentimes when people discuss microaggressions, they refer to them as innocent acts, and that the person who experiences them should just lighten up, learn how to take a joke, excuse me. Don't make such a big deal about it. Just let it go. And so my question to you all is, do you agree or do you disagree? And then explain, your point of view. What do you think? Is it a situation where, people should just lighten up?
I can go. I
Yes,
don't.
Kira.
So I feel like telling people to lighten up is basically telling someone how to feel or like controlling their emotions. So if they're opening up and saying that something bothers them, I feel like as the respondent, you should respect that and then just like move on from it and not do it again.
Yeah, respect the person's feelings, right? Don't engage in that micro invalidation. And let's see, I see a couple comments. Kelly says no, because you're telling them that their feelings aren't valued. Yes. Rowan says, I think that telling someone to lighten up discredits their lived experience. You are absolutely correct, Rowan. It's like telling them that what you've experienced your entire life is not the reality. And a term for that is called gaslighting. And some of you may have heard of that term before, but gaslighting years and years ago, the term came about because what was happening was men, and this, you can research this yourself, men were using gaslighting against their wives. And so what they were doing is they were turning the lights up, the house lights up, and they were, going off and everything. And the wives were complaining about it, and they were saying, well, what are you talking about? And they were basically saying that, making them think that they were crazy. In essence, is what was happening. That no, that didn't happen. And that is often equated to microaggressions, is the gaslighting syndrome, where you're saying, well, no, that really didn't happen. And so you just should lighten up, or it's not as serious as what you say it is. So I'm going to keep us moving here. If you have additional comments, feel free to throw those in the chat. I love this quote here because it really summarizes the notion that people should just lighten up. It really summarizes the thought that microaggressions are just something that people just need to learn to live with or accept. And it says it isn't about having your feelings hurt. It's not about it. It is about how being repeatedly dismissed and alienated and insulted and invalidated reinforces the differences in power and privilege, and how this perpetuates racism and other types of isms. It perpetuates sexism. It perpetuates heterosexism. It perpetuates ageism. It perpetuates even discrimination against veterans. That's one category that we haven't mentioned yet, but even veterans. And from the perspective that oftentimes if from an employment standpoint, when veterans apply for jobs, people are making assumptions, and they're saying, oh, they're assuming that that veteran must, if they're returning from combat, they're probably experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. And what does that mean for us as an organization? So there's a lot of bias even in that. So let me get over here to responding to microaggressions, as Stephanie was talking about, and then we'll jump into some scenarios. So when it comes to responding to microaggressions, the truth is that most people do not confront them. But I want you to understand that confronting microaggressions can help the other person to realize their bias and to change their behavior. I like to say that when we know better, we do better. And so it helps people to know when they have done or said something that has upset you or offended you, particularly if it has degraded, your background or your ethnicity or something of that nature. Confronting also sets a norm that the behavior is not okay. And from an organizational standpoint, the leaders within the organization, that should be, one of your primary goals is to ensure that the norms are set, that certain behaviors are not acceptable, that we have standards of conduct here that we abide by, and that it's okay to say to someone, we don't do that here. Now, according to Dr. Alicia Tran, who is an associate professor of counseling psychology at Arizona State University, she says that most people ignore and shake off microaggressions. And why? One of the primary reasons is because they're so common, and people who experience them on a regular basis, they say, look, I can't fight every battle. And we've all heard the saying, we have to choose our battles. And sometimes that's what happens with individuals when they say, you know what, I can't fight every battle, so I'm going to let this one go. But what happens is that these things can stay with you, and they can build up. And we understand, or we can very much assume what happens when we allow things to fester. We know within our organizations, when we allow things such as conflict to fester, what can potentially happen. It can blow up, it can explode on us. And that's the very same thing with microaggressions when we don't address them. Now, Dr. Kevin Nato, who is a professor, a psychology professor, he suggests 5 questions to ask yourself when you are weighing the consequences of responding to a microaggression. The first one is, if I respond, could my physical safety be in danger? And someone mentioned that earlier, from the perspective of, when you experience a microaggression, sometimes it makes you feel unsafe. Well, that's one of the questions that people are asking me. Will my physical safety be in danger? Will someone either verbally or physically attack me if I, let them know that what they did was microaggressive? If I respond, will the person become defensive, and will this lead to an argument? So I'm going to tell you some strategies to go about having that discussion with that individual that hopefully will diffuse the situation. But there are some times when we just simply have to walk away, especially if you are telling someone that what they said was offensive to you. And then you feel that your psychological safety, there's no psychological safety for you. Sometimes what the best thing is to do is to walk away, and then to wait until cooler heads prevail, and then to go back and try to have that conversation again. But if it's turning into an argument, you're not getting anywhere. So you need to cut the conversation off and then try again another day. Another question to evaluate is, if I respond, how will this affect my relationship with the person? And since we're talking about in a work setting, will this damage my relationship? If I'm an employee and I need to tell my boss that he or she committed a microaggression, how will this affect my relationship? How will it affect my performance review or my merit increase? These are all questions that people are grappling with. If I don't respond, will I regret not saying something? And let me share with you a personal experience that I had in which I did not respond, and how I regret it even to this day. So I used to work at an organization, and one of our leaders was coming around. It was on a Friday afternoon, and was coming around and just asking everybody, hey, how you doing? How was your week? What are you doing for the weekend? And so he stopped by my desk and said, hey, what are you doing for the weekend? And at that particular weekend, I was going for a girls' night out with some of my Zumba friends. I did Zumba at the YMCA for a number of years. And so we were going out on a girls' night out. Well, we called it a girls' night out, but we did have some guys in our Zumba class. And so his immediate response to me was, oh, well, what are you going to do? Go around, sit around and eat a bunch of fried chicken. Now, you all tell me, what do you think his assumption was? His assumption was, first of all, that all of my Zumba friends must have been African Americans because, of course, African Americans just eat fried chicken, right? Now, I'm being real with you all because this is the hidden, remember I talked about hidden messages. This was the hidden message that I heard, that he assumed that all African Americans do is eat fried chicken. The truth is that my Zumba class was very diverse. It was made up of men and women. There were a number of young people, in their 20s, but there were some folks in their 60s in my Zumba class. There were different races and different ethnicities. This was a very diverse class. And so his assumption was way off base. And in fact, no, we weren't eating fried chicken. We went to a Mexican restaurant. But my point is, I did not say anything. I let it go. I made the choice that, I can't fight every battle. And maybe on some level, because he was a senior member of the organization, I also chose not to say something because I didn't know how it was going to affect the relationship. But to this day, I regret not saying something because it was an opportunity to educate him and to know how what he said made me feel, the hidden messages behind it, so that he could learn from it. So I wanted to share that example about, regretting not saying something. And then lastly, if I don't respond, does that convey that I accept the behavior or statement? And that the answer to that is probably a yes, that it's conveying that you didn't have a problem with it, it didn't bother you, that it was okay. And the danger of doing that is it may give the person permission to continue to engage in the behavior. All right, one last slide before we get into some of our scenarios. Here is another strategy for disarming microaggressions. So when someone either does or says something, and this is more in a format of a comment, so ask for more clarification. Could you say more what you mean by that? Or how have you come to think that? I'll use a couple different examples. Millennials. We all have heard various stereotypes about millennials, right? I know we have some millennials on the phone. We've heard things such as, they're entitled, or, they don't work hard. They don't have a good work ethic. And we've heard things about baby boomers as well. We've heard that they're just set in their ways. They're resistant to change and all of those different types of things. And we've heard stereotypes about, other groups. And so when you hear those types of things, ask the person, could you tell me more what you mean by that? Could you tell me a little bit more about how you've come to think that, millennials are lazy? Or can you, tell me a little bit more why you assume that all older workers are not good with technology? Like, what is your evidence of that? The next step is to separate intent from impact and say, now, I know you didn't realize this, but so let's use another example. I think I shared earlier that some examples that occur in the workplace is, for instance, if you're in a meeting and someone cuts you off and they're consistently cutting you off, and it oftentimes does happen to women. I know you didn't realize this, but when you cut so-and-so off in the meeting, or you cut me off in the meeting, it was hurtful because I felt like you didn't value what I had to say. I felt like what I had to say wasn't important, or you thought that it wasn't important. Excuse me, it looks like someone else is trying to come into the meeting. I felt like you were dismissing me. So you're going to describe, what the behavior was and how it impacted you. I can give you a number of other examples, but we'll stop there. And then instead, you could say, another example that I will share is, and I have a scenario about this a little bit later, but how many of you have either heard or utilized this phrase yourself? Oh, stop acting retarded, or that's so retarded, or that's so gay. So what you could say is, I know you didn't realize this, but when you said that's so retarded, it was hurtful because I have a child, or I have a parent, or I have a friend, a close friend, or whomever that is, who has a mental health diagnosis. And it's very hurtful to me when people just, very in a cavalier way say that's so retarded. And instead, what you could say is, oh, you're really funny, or what you said was really funny, or something of that nature, and really correct them. Or I didn't know, I know you didn't realize this, but when you said that's so gay, it was hurtful because, and you fill in the blanks. Maybe it's because you yourself identify as a member of the LGBTQ community, and that's very hurtful for you, or you have a family member or a friend, or you're an ally of members in that community, and it's hurtful and it's offensive. And instead, what you could say is, and then explain to them what they could say differently, and explain to them the meaning behind what they're saying. Oh, that's so gay. Explaining that meaning, and then share your own process. So I noticed that you say that's so retarded. And folks, I will admit that when I was younger, I grew up with brothers, and we used to use that term. And I don't know how many of you, would agree with that. And Jim says, yes, my son is on the spectrum. And thank you for sharing that. Jim, I mean, since you typed that, like if someone says that's so retarded, how does that make you feel? What does that convey to you?
Well, yeah, again, like what you guys alluded earlier.
Oh, Jim, I think you went on mute. I don't know if you were still talking.
Hold on. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like you, when I was younger, and I had lots of cousins and siblings and stuff, and we'd say that to each other, like, oh, that's so retarded. You didn't think twice about it. But then,
right.
Right now, the perception has changed because now all of a sudden, we have a son who's, on the spectrum, and when you hear it, because you see, kids, or you hear kids or people around our son or friends or the school he's at, and sometimes they'll just say, "Oh, those kids are over there." I'm like, "Well, who are you referring to about those kids?" And it kind of, I think it heightens when it now all of a sudden is personalized to you, you become much more, keenly aware. And I think that's now broaden that out to whether it's race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever it may be. It gives you a taste of saying, "Gee, what do other people think when people hear you say that is so blah, that is so ABC or XYZ, whatever it is." Now you can get a taste of that reality of saying, how other people you may be hearing comments as well, and I think it brings you more attuned. So I guess the takeaway is that just be aware, for all of us that are on the call and everybody else, is that we all have a hot button. We all have something that, whether a flaw, or whether it's something that makes us unique or different or stand out more. And when people attack it, it makes you defensive. How does that make you feel? So, just apply that to, and think through what you're going to say or act out on. So that way, recognize how others may be feeling, or recognizing those comments and everything as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Well stated. Thank you for sharing that.
I think too, another thing that I is thinking of during this is that a lot of times too, if we see someone in, let's say, a wheelchair, or someone that has a sick child, or someone that maybe have, autism or something or related to that, that you look at them and you look bad, like you feel bad for them. So you don't look them in the eye, or you don't, acknowledge them. And I read it in a book once that it was like, that's more hurtful to me than, or someone who was maybe in a wheelchair or had a disability, and said that's more hurtful to me because they're just assuming I have this bad life, or they're just assuming that I want you to feel bad for me. And I think that's something, I even realize myself that does it sometimes. And I think it's an unconscious thing you do, not out of, it's just something that you do that I think I try to work on, because I just don't want, I think it's just unconscious, something that, you deal with.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Stephanie. And I think also that sometimes what it conveys is that that person is invisible. And what you're trying to do is you're trying not to, cause them to believe that you're looking down on them, or that you're feeling pity for them, but it's having the opposite effect. Because I've heard people who are wheelchair bound say things like, I feel invisible. I feel like they don't see me. So yeah, that's an excellent point. All right, so now let's jump into some of our scenarios here. I wanted to just share this terminology with you. Some of you may or may not be familiar with this, but it's called othering. And what this is it's a phenomenon in which individuals or groups are defined or labeled as not fitting within the norms of a social group. And so this is important to understand, because, from many aspects of the employment life cycle. For instance, when we're recruiting for our open positions, and if we're looking at individuals from the perspective of, well, are they a culture fit? And that is a term that I no longer use. We used to use that years and years ago in the HR world. And what we thought we were talking about is, do they fit within our culture? But what it has evolved to is, if you think about it, if we're looking at it from the perspective of, is someone a culture fit? If we look at the dynamics of our teams, for instance, and let's say our team is all female, and we're interviewing a male for a position, and we say, well, he's just not a culture fit. What it could do is it could assume some level of discrimination, because we're saying, well, what do you mean by culture fit? Do you have all females on your team and you rejected this qualified male? Are you really talking about he's not a culture fit because he's not a female? And there's a number of other examples, that can be utilized or stated with respect to that. And so I always advise that, particularly from a recruiting standpoint, that if we're looking to add staff, let's not use the term culture fit. Let's use the terminology culture add. Because what we're really looking for is, what value does the person bring to the organization, right? We're looking at their skill set. And what we should be looking at is, okay, what skills are missing in our organization? What skills are missing on our teams? And we're looking at candidates who can fill those gaps. So let's, try not to use the term culture fit anymore, because it could indicate some level of discrimination. So let's look at some scenarios. So one of your colleagues Jean goes out of her way to make everyone feel loved and accepted. And some of her coworkers feel threatened by her because she is well liked by others, especially students and parents of the Boys and Girls Club. And so, those colleagues start to other her. They label her as not fitting into our social norms. And so one day, Jean walks past a group of coworkers and she overhears someone say her. And it's clear to her that they are referring to her, Jean, and the tone of voice leaves no doubt that they are alienating her and making it clear that she is not in their group. What do you do? How do you handle this situation? What would you do if you witnessed this? Let's hear from some of you who haven't spoken yet. What would you do? This is your colleague who's experiencing this. Any thoughts?
I know I've spoken, but I would, yeah, I would probably, how I would approach it is try to find someone in the group I'm close to and say, I overheard you guys talking, and try to, explain my perspective or where I was coming from. I probably wouldn't approach the whole group. I would probably take someone who in the group who I was close to and talk to them about it.
Yeah, yeah.
A little bit different than Stephanie. I would approach the group and say, well, what do you mean? And I think that when you talked about, Sheila, you talked about some of the techniques that you use. One of the ones that I have before is kind of play dumb and said, well, can you explain that? Because sometimes when there are microaggressions, they are aware of what they're doing. And so because you're aware and I'm aware, I'm just going to play a little bit dumb and say, well, what is it that you mean by that? So I would approach the whole group and say, well, what do you mean by her? Doesn't she have a name?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that strategy. And you mentioned play dumb. Another strategy, and this may seem like, just something very simple, but it works. Sometimes when these types of situations are happening and people are engaged in inappropriate conversations or even bullying within the organization, sometimes causing a distraction, dropping a book, making a loud sound, or saying, hey, everybody, let's go here or let's do this, or changing the subject. But I think that it is important as we're talking about creating a welcoming, inclusive environment that you do either, if you're not comfortable yourself approaching them, then letting a member of the management and leadership team know, because what we don't want to happen is for these behaviors to continue and for people to feel like they're being bullied or othered and to feel like they're not accepted, not welcomed. And then the other issue with this is it could ultimately lead to harassment. And so we want to absolutely ward those types of things off. And I'm not sure exactly, I'm going to say I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how to pronounce your name, but you said, I think if I was sitting in that group, I would redirect the conversation into welcoming her. And that is a great strategy as well, because what you're doing is you're becoming Anissa. Thank you. What you're doing is you're welcoming Jean. You're letting her know that, hey, everyone is not against you, and you are welcome here. And you're also conveying to the other folks that, this is not okay. So yes, thank you, Anissa. This is just telling, go ahead.
I just want to throw out as well, this is Jim again, is that I think a lot of it is too, because I've, having been in many organizations over probably too many years, but it is that sometimes you go in to an organization or there's it's I hate the term of, well, we've always done it this way, or this is the way it always is, or this is, and because I remember growing up, my parents, I guess, maybe instilled in me, that value of, if I referred to my parents, I said, I'd be talking to my dad, I'd say, well, she told me to go do my homework. uh, I get soap in my mouth saying, no, she is your mother. And he can refer to her as mom or mother. And so it was instilled in me early, but I think that it's, a paradigm shift because, if people are so used to, whether it's culture or just the environment that they've been in, and whether it's bad or good, they've adopted it, and we have to, I think as leaders and as managers, as supervisors, we have to be constantly aware of saying and making sure that it's that there's a level of respect and openness that, when you see things, you catch it early, and you address it, and you don't have to be threatening about it. But it pushes a learning experience. I think that way that people adopt those behaviors, and they modify how they do things so they're more inclusive. And I think that's also very important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And from a leader standpoint, you own the culture, right? You're responsible for the culture. And so as leaders, what you accept and tolerate or what you ignore will become the norm. People will assume that, oh, well, it's okay to behave in this manner because, nothing is ever done. Or, my leader saw me or heard me engage in this behavior and didn't say anything, so it must be acceptable. It's that whole silence conveys acceptance. So you're absolutely right. Here are some reasons listed why people other, this is in your packet, and so you can read that. I wanted to get over here. This is another strategy. Some of you may know, this may look like a familiar strategy to you. It's called the I statements. One of the the best ways to go about confronting or addressing a microaggression is to prepare for the conversation. Because if you go in cold turkey, 9 times out of 10, you may be going in from an emotional standpoint. And even though there is some emotion in it, you still want to go from a position of these are the facts. And so what you see here on the screen is another tool. It's called the fact and impact tool. And you're just dealing with, the situation as it is. So what was the statement? That's first thing. Well, John repeatedly interrupted me when I spoke during the meeting. Okay, well, what assumption or stereotype or belief might have prompted that statement or action? Okay, Stephanie says she'll send out the slides after the training. That's okay. So what is the assumption? Well, that men are better at business or they generate better ideas. Okay, then what message about me or my skills did it imply? Well, it implies that they're not valued. I'm not valued. My contributions aren't valued. And why did I feel hurt? Or how did I feel? I felt hurt, angry, insignificant. And how did it affect my behavior? Okay, well, I stopped sharing ideas during the meetings. So when you're clear about these things, then you can have the conversation. Then you can convey your message to the individual who engaged in the microaggression, because you can be crystal clear about this is what happened. This is how it made me feel. This is why I felt that way. And this is what I really need from you, what I need from you. And then you explain what you need differently from that person. Or, like I said, when you use this language or you say this, I'll use an example, as an African-American female, I've often had people say, oh, can I touch your hair? And let me just tell you, that is a no-no, okay? Just take that tip from me. But what it conveys to me, I mean, first of all is, do they think my hair is real, not real, or what is so intriguing about my hair that you would need to touch it? Because that is not often a statement that, that is stated towards my white counterparts. I've never heard that before. And so how does it make me feel? It feels like you're, I can't think of the word right now. It just slipped my mind. But I've had to have those conversations with individuals before as to how it makes me feel and why it's not okay to do that. And so, and again, it's important to educate people. Now, one of the other ways that we overcome microaggressions is through micro affirmations. And these are just small acknowledgments of people's value. I mean, this is basically where we're valuing people. Jim talked about, from a cultural standpoint, what are the standards that are set within the organization? And we want to value people. We want to know that, let them know that we value their contributions. We value them as a person. We embrace them and all of their differences. And so here are some examples that are listed from a leadership standpoint, and as well as peer-to-peer, asking others for their opinions. This is an example of a micro affirmation. We want to know what your opinion is, and we value your opinion. And leaders, let me say this. It's one thing to ask people for their opinions, but it's another thing in terms of how you respond. Just as an example, I once worked for a leader who asked for our opinions about the culture. And in fact, they put us in groups and paid for us all to go to lunch or dinner in our little groups and talk about, what we thought was going well, what we thought could be improved. And then we were all gathering together back as a large group and sharing that. And so that happened. We did that. And we shared the group that I was in shared some ideas that the leadership didn't like, and it was disastrous. It was a really, really bad meeting. And so my point is, if you're going to ask for people's opinions, you've got to value their opinions and listen. Affirm people's feelings and their experiences. And I'll just say this, over the last year, we've had a number of traumatic experiences just in our society. We've been in a pandemic. We've had racial injustice. We've had, just a lot going on. And I can say, and I've had this conversation with a lot of different organizations, that African Americans, your employees, your students, the parents are dealing with a lot of trauma, out of the racial and social justice. They may or may not want to talk about it, but if they do, affirm their experience, don't invalidate their experience, and ask them how you can help. Ask them how you can be of support. Recognizing people's achievements, being friendly. Things as simple as saying good morning to people. You would think that that's just a common courtesy, but that doesn't always happen. And it causes people to feel invisible and not belonging if they walk into, and you'd be surprised, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, how many organizations I go into and people tell me, well, my leaders come in the morning and I'm invisible to them. They don't even speak to me. So things like that are very, very important. And then taking a genuine professional interest in someone's personal life. Here are just some additional examples. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you made the choice to work for the Boys and Girls Club of Toledo, or I'm seeing you making progress. Feedback, that's another area of micro affirmation, is giving people feedback and catch them doing things well. Catch them doing things, positive things. Don't always just focus on the negative feedback. What will you do differently next time, and so on and so forth. I noticed that you're interested in this. And this one really speaks to, development. I noticed that you're interested in, project management or something like that. Have you considered, or, I have a project for you that I was thinking about, and giving them more opportunities. All right. So let's get into some more scenarios here. Okay. So you're a unit director and you see two students fighting. Before you can arrive on the scene, one of the students has fled, and you attempt to find the other student, and you assume it's a boy who's walking away quickly away from the area in which the fight began. And you yell at the boy and take him to the principal's office. But you later find out that the real offender was actually a girl who had ducked into a nearby classroom. So what stereotype is at play here? And Jim says, thank you, Jim. Leaders walk the ship every morning so staff can see them and say hello. Excellent, excellent. What stereotype is at play here? We assumed that the students that were fighting were two boys when in fact it was a girl. So what assumptions are we making? Sam says boys are more likely to be aggressive or physical. Yeah, Sam, that's what we're assuming, that it's always the boys. If there's trouble, there's always the boys, and that girls fight less than boys. And I'll tell you, just the other day, this whole gas shortage crisis, they showed on the television the other day that a couple people got into a fight at a gas station over a pump, and there was a female that was fighting. I think she threw the first punch towards a guy. So we cannot make those assumptions. And Anissa says, assuming all young boys are trouble. You are exactly right, Anissa. Assuming that all young boys are trouble and that the girls are, the sweet ones and that they don't involve in any type of, behavior that is unacceptable. So we really need to be careful, about that. You all work with students on a regular basis. And, we just need to be careful about the assumptions that we make about boys and girls, about our students, where they live, where they come from, their upbringing, and even their parents. We need to be careful with that. Now let's go to another one. So this one, what you see here on the screen, I want you to look at this picture on the left side of the screen and tell me what it is that you see. This is out of a workbook. What do you see here?
That the African American kids are like linked to the negative emotions like sad and angry.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. And I got this as, I was preparing for this training and trying to make it more specific to your organization. And I was researching and came across this, and I thought it was perfect to include in the training. This was something that was posted by a Facebook user. And this was in one of her child's vocabulary workbooks. And so she, posted it on Facebook and was very upset. And she pointed out what Braden, is it Braden or Brandon? I'm sorry. Brandon, okay. She pointed out exactly what Brandon pointed out, is that in this picture, it portrays, the African American students as sad and angry, and the white students as happy and proud. And so, to a student or parent of color, a statement such as, why are you so angry? Or you don't have to be so angry. Is this a microaggression? And Kelly says the kids of color are the angry and sad kids, and yes, yeah, and the white kids are happy and proud. So is this a microaggression? Is it unconscious bias? Yet Kelly says yes. Yeah. What else? I want to hear from some of the others of you. You all work
My
with
son
kids.
actually had this. My son
Yeah, go
actually
ahead.
had this in his book. His. I think I'm wrong.
And you're going in and out.
I'm gonna go in the car now.
Okay. And just let us know, Shauna, when. Oh, you're good now. I think you're good now.
She's on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My son actually had this in his book, and he was able to read. So yes, it's a microaggression, but it's also something that early on, and it could be considered an expectation of behavior when it's not.
And Shauna, you keep going in and out, so I don't know if it would be helpful if you turn your camera off. Sometimes that helps.
While we're waiting for Shauna, I think this is a macro
Mm.
aggression
Mm-hmm.
because this is systematic. Someone published this book and made it available to youngsters, and it no longer is to the one youngster who's reading
Go to
it,
the
but this
chat.
is
Sorry,
this
I have
is
you.
just systematic aggressive behavior.
Yeah, Stan, and thank you for saying that. And I should say that the publisher of the book did pull all the copies of this book. They did issue an apology. They acknowledged it. And so from that perspective, I thought that they did a really good job jumping on this situation, acknowledging. They pulled all of the copies and so forth and destroyed them and did not issue it anymore. But that's something, I mean, because you all deal with students on a regular basis, right? And so, we have to be consciously aware that these types of images and portrayals may be in some of the books that we have. I think someone's trying to talk. Is that you, Brandon?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. All right. All right. So let's keep going. All right. So some more scenarios. So an employee is overheard endorsing religious stereotypes, such as, they make jokes about Muslim people being terrorists or Jewish people being cheap, or they refer to Christians as religious fanatics. So what do you do in this situation? Do you confront this? Do you say something?
Yeah, I mean, if I hear that in the workplace, me directly, I would pull the individual aside, because, I mean, I don't want to, I wouldn't call it out, solely as the display in front of everybody. I would pull the individual or individuals aside and have a conversation with them saying,
It's hard to hear you. You sound like you're kind of in a tunnel.
oh, sorry. Is this better?
A little.
I guess I would pull
Better.
I would pull the individuals aside or individual aside and just have the conversation as to why the comment was made. Number one, but then number two, um, you know, position it and reposition it back to them to say, here's how I hear it, or others may hear it, and so that way they can understand or at least appreciate how others may be perceiving it, and then just ask if number one, is that their intent or not, and try to and then from there understand, educate, and correct that behavior and what was said, so it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I love what you said, Jim, about understand, educate, and correct. I like that. The other thing that I would add is we always have to go back to our policies. What do our policies say? Do our policies tolerate this type of behavior? And I'm pretty confident that your policies don't allow for this type of behavior. So part of it, like Jim said, it is understand, educate, and I just forgot the third one, but we also have to be mindful of, is this behavior acceptable within the confines of our policies? And so we don't allow discriminatory, practices. And when these types of things are happening, sometimes it moves over into the realm of discrimination. But we also, I hope the theme that you all are hearing today is we want to make sure that we're creating a respectful work environment. a respectful, welcoming, and inclusive work environment. And so if we're making any group of people feel unaccepted, unwelcome by making these types of comments, then we want to address these types of issues because we don't want to make judgments or assumptions based on any type of religious affiliation at all. And I think that that's the point here. And again, leaders, we want to point back to our policy. What does our policy say? We do not tolerate any form of discrimination or harassment on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, and so on and so forth. Next, a female employee is repeatedly interrupted and spoken over by a male colleague during meetings who assumes he knows more than she does. What do you do? What do you do? You're observing this.
I think that this goes back to those statements that you were making before about explaining. I know you may not realize, but when you speak over me, I feel as though you may be devaluing what I have to say, or something along those lines. What you were kind of saying before. I think that would be very appropriate to make that type of statement if this was something that was ongoing.
Yes. And Rowan, what if you were the observer? What if that was happening to one of your colleagues and you observed this? Would you intervene? Would you say something? And if so, what?
I think I would say something along the lines of, I would really like to hear what so-and-so has to say. And I think that would also be very appropriate to make that comment in that situation.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I would really like to hear, what John or what Sally has to say. Let's give them an opportunity to speak. Shauna says, I've had this happen to me and my colleagues intervene. Shauna, if you would be so kind as to share, what was it specifically that your colleagues said when they intervened? Kelly says, honestly, I have been in this situation more than once, and I have even had the experiences of making suggestions and being ignored, but then a male colleague made the same suggestion and his suggestion was rewarded and put forth. I didn't say anything, but I wish I had. Yeah, Kelly, and that's called mansplaining, and that does happen. And as Ron was saying, intervening and saying something like, I would really like to hear, what my colleague has to say. Another strategy is, and particularly if it's happening more often than not, is to pull that person aside and say, and Rowan referenced one of the earlier strategies, you may not realize this, or maybe you do realize what you're doing. And I think what it does is it's disrespecting, our colleague. And I really think, that it would be helpful if you would not continue doing that and point it out to them. You were speaking to one of your Boys and Girls Club Be Our Friend partners, and I got this off of your website, so I hope this scenario is okay. And you're speaking to them on the phone, and out of the blue, they say, if people just would work harder, they would not be poor. Maybe you've heard that before. Now, I'm not asking how you would respond because some of you may say, well, this is one of our donors and I don't know that it would be appropriate for me to respond, and that's okay. But what is the implicit bias in this type of statement?
I can see a couple of them, and I would say encouraging folks to have those somewhat uncomfortable conversations, even if it is a donor, because they can be educational. Part of this is people worked harder. We all work very hard, and we work for what folks consider a nonprofit, which would imply that we, maybe this is a career path that we didn't necessarily choose, but it's one of the most valuable career paths that you can have, especially when it comes to helping young people. So there's that. And then the second is obviously implying that families who utilize our services and the youngsters we serve don't work hard.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes. And I see Kelly said that poor people are lazy. Yeah. What else? Undoubtedly, you have people that have this perception. Any other thoughts?
I think another one is that if this is, when I read this, it's speaking mostly to the, like Billy said, the folks that utilize our services, but it's not just poor people that can utilize our services, and which would be anybody can get a lot of benefit out of the Boys and Girls Clubs, regardless of your background or how much money your family has. So that's another one that I see out of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And Sam says that all people who are poor do not work hard and that the only barrier to not being poor is working hard. Yeah. And we know that that is absolutely not true, because we know that there are parents, who are working multiple jobs, right? And being poor, as I think someone was saying, as Billy was saying, um, is not an indication of, who the only people are who are utilizing our services. And I think it's helpful to, whether it's a donor or not, to educate them, because sometimes what happens, and I'm very much aware of this, is they may be a donor and they may be donating to satisfy some need that they have. But they still may have this implicit bias or this belief that, these individuals are poor, they don't work hard, they're undeserving, and so on and so forth. And so with this one, it's important to really educate people about really what your services are and the benefits that anyone can receive from utilizing them. Kelly also says something I'm hearing a lot now is that people don't want to work because they are getting stimulus money. So the bias is that people who are getting stimulus money are lazy and don't want to work. Yeah, there's a lot. That's very much loaded, Kelly. So you're absolutely right. All right, let's see here. What else? A male colleague repeatedly calls a female colleague sweetie. So what do you do in this instance? You hear this. And Billy says, many of us are the only frame of reference to donors and others who have never had experience with marginalized communities, and being educators to those folks can sometimes be uncomfortable at first, but many times folks appreciate a different perspective. Yeah, and often the correct perspective. And I love that, Billy. You are absolutely correct. They've not had the experience. And that really speaks to, privilege, right? There's a definition of privilege that I really like, and it says that privilege is thinking that something is not a problem because it's not a problem to you personally. And there's all sorts of other definitions of privilege, but that one in particular really strikes with me because, as Billy was saying, that is what came to mind to me, is that sometimes when people have not experienced what someone else has experienced, they have no frame of reference and they can't relate. And so they do need to be educated. And Kelly also says, tell them politely that my name or her name is, and yes. Yes, absolutely, Kelly. My name is, or her name is. And again, this one goes back to our policies. I'm in HR. I'm a recovering HR professional. I like to joke around and say, no, I love HR. I've had a long career in that. And so I'm a policy person. And I always refer back to, what does the policy say? And again, this may be something that someone may think is innocent, referring to someone as sweetie or honey, or I've even heard people refer to their colleagues, maybe a younger person refer to a more senior colleague as granny or grandpa and different things like that. Or I had a colleague one time, and I was a fully grown adult because this was like 4 years ago, who used to refer to me as kiddo. And so what these types of things, I mean, it conveys different things to people, right? But mostly what it comes down to is this disrespect. When you're calling, younger people kiddo, or you're calling, more senior workers grandpa or grandma, or referring to them by anything other than their name, it just conveys disrespect. So go back to, what does the policy state? All right, this one is one of my favorites. So you have an immediate need to fill an open position. You mentioned to a colleague that you noticed that there are no diverse candidates in the pool and that you prefer to wait until you receive more diverse applicants. Your colleague responds, "You shouldn't sacrifice quality for the sake of hiring diverse candidates." How do you respond in this instance? And I guess another question that I would ask is, is there bias in this statement that you shouldn't sacrifice quality for the sake of hiring diverse candidates? And if so, what is the bias? And then how would you respond?
Kind of like I like what Sam just put out there, but I'm gonna throw out a couple different thoughts. This is Jim again. Here, I think that there's a couple things that need to be addressed with this. The first is that as you're hiring for a position, and you're defining what that position is and needs to be. As an example, is it a CPA to be an accountant? Is it whatever it may be? I think that the step one is that we want to make sure that we cast a wide net to attract the people that are going to be the best qualified to fill the role. And so to do that, you can't just go to source A or to this posting agency B or whatever. You need to be able to go out and cast that net and say, okay, well, where are people going to be, so we can get a broad array of candidates that can apply, look at the job, and determine themselves if they believe that they're a good fit for this organization or for that position. So I think the first thing is that we need to identify, how do we cast the net. Yeah. And then I think the next thing is that we just have to take that step back then. And as we evaluate, I think there's a natural awareness, and I think that it's good, because I think people have turned a blind eye to saying, "Oh, gee, we have to look for somebody that fits the stereotype of what a professional engineer is, or a CPA is, or whatever an oncologist is," and you have to kind of put that to the side and say, "Well, I think we have to be and put the conversation in the middle of the table and in the middle of the room and say, okay, well, we have to take a look at what we look like and what we represent as an organization, and make sure that we're representing ourselves and the customers and the communities that we serve well. But then at the same time, we still have to make sure that we're meeting and exceeding the expectations of what we think we're looking for as far as the role. So it's a balancing act, and it's not easy, but it's an important balancing act that we need to continuously do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I put a punctuation mark on everything that you just said, Jim, and acknowledge Sam's comment as well, that the person is assuming none of the diverse candidates will have quality in it. And I think someone was trying to speak.
It was me, and I think that we have a unique obligation because we're not just an office that produces products. We are a an organization that deals with young people, and the perception of young people when there's not a diverse staff or there's not diverse management says something there are no words that can describe having not seen your representation in the leader of a club as well as in the leader in a department. So in some cases, if we didn't have, I would submit that if we didn't have a diverse pool for a certain position, we ought to wait and try to get diversity there so that we can truly say that that person is the best candidate and the best that we can do for our kids in terms of how they look at their experience at the club.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Sam. And again, I punctuate everything that you just said because it's important. It's important for anyone, whether it's on the basis of race or it could be, even a child who has identified, as LGBTQ, and to be able to see someone that looks, or not looks like them, but that they can identify with. And all of these things are important because it says to that student, that child, that you are important. Kelly says, I would continue to look for diversity and quality. It is important for our members to see and interact with a diverse group of staff members. If we're going to impact kids and fulfill our mission, we need to have a diverse staff, and diversity needs not just be raised. Yeah, that's exactly correct, Kelly. That's exactly what I was just saying. And so, that means we have to have a strategy, right? Not suggesting you don't, but that we need to have a strategy, a recruiting strategy for, what is going to be the makeup of our staff, what's going to be the makeup of our leadership, what's going to be the makeup of our boards. Because boards are equally important as well, because they are decision makers. So absolutely. All right, let's keep going. Here's another microaggression that occurs often, and this one is not necessarily on the basis of race or anything else. It's just things that happen. So you see someone getting credit for something another colleague said earlier in the meeting. What do you do? You observe this. What do you do? What do you say? Kelly says, again, this happens a lot. Oh, and Marty, I apologize. I missed that comment. Marty says, is holding out for diversity not otherism? Marty, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Earlier, when we were talking about the culture fit scenario, in which like if you had a group of women and a man applied, whatever, I guess I just like more explanations of how holding out for a diverse candidate would not be just another example of that. Because maybe I'm missing something. I don't know.
Yeah, so it all goes back to the strategy, Marty, in terms of, are we looking to diversify our team? And if we're saying that, well, let me share an example. So I know of a particular organization, they were looking to hire, was a senior level position, and they were receiving candidates for that position, but there were not diverse candidates. And they had a very specific focus and a strategy to hire a diverse candidate for that particular staff, because they didn't, and when I speak of diverse, I do mean on the basis of race, because in their entire leadership team, and there was like 10, they had no person of color on their team. And so they were very strategic and very intent on hiring a person of color in that role, because it was part of their strategy, and they felt like it was necessary to diversify because they had a lot of diverse team members. And I think, as Stan was saying earlier, it's just as important as it is for a student to see someone who either looks like them on the basis of race, that it's equally important for our staff to see individuals in positions of leadership that, look like them as well, because what it communicates is that I can aspire to that. But beyond that, when you have diversity, and the data shows this, there's tons of studies out there that show this, that when the organizations that have diversity from a race and a gender standpoint, both in their senior leadership and their boards of directors, and I'd be happy to share some studies with Stephanie to forward to you all, those companies that have that diversity in their leadership and on their board of directors outperform their competitors because they have diverse thoughts, pools of thought in their leadership and on their board. So I don't know if that answered your question at all. I hope that it did. You can let me know in the chat, or we can certainly talk about it some more, but I hope that did answer your question. Oh, back to this one. Any comments? If you see a colleague getting credit for something someone else said or did, this happens a lot in organizations, and it creates some tensions. Stephanie says, oh, hold on. First, Anissa says, maybe acknowledge the colleague who had the original idea and simply say, I think Dan had a similar idea. Yes, I like that. And then Stephanie says, my suggestion is to always call it out as soon as possible. It could be privately after a meeting, or saying to the colleague that it was my idea and why did you take credit for it? Try to use the language of help. Help me understand why you took credit for my idea, and then move forward with open dialogue. Yes. And the reason why this one is so important, and I wanted to have some conversation around it, is because it happens a lot in organizations where, someone is taking credit. And to be quite honest with you, the research shows that oftentimes our leaders are the one who are guilty of this, that one of their staff members brings forth an idea or makes a suggestion, and the leader, takes it forth to senior leadership or takes it to the board, and they take full credit for it. And not only is it wrong, but it minimizes the contributions of your team players. So leaders, not that this one is specifically for you, but acknowledge or understand that this could be problematic, because what it does is it makes your employees feel not valued. So I'm going to bring us to a close here. That next one, I think we've talked about a number of these. And so we have 3. Oh, I do have an evaluation. And Stephanie, I'm going to stop my share. And I don't know, I forgot to ask you if it would be appropriate to have people fill out an evaluation. But I'm going to stop right now. And we have just a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask if anyone has any final questions or comments. Kelly says, but doesn't that put the responsibility of calling out the disrespect on the person who is disrespected and not the person who is disrespectful? I am a non-confrontational person. For me to confront the person would be uncomfortable for me. Is that in reference to Stephanie's comment, Kelly? I wanted to be clear. Okay. All right. Well, so look, I'll answer this. When we talk about accountability in our organizations. You know, I'm assuming, I haven't read your policies, but I'm assuming that your policy might say something to the effect, your harassment policy, that if you feel as though you have been a victim of harassment, here are some steps to take. First of all, you know, try to have a conversation with the person who engaged in the harassing behavior. If you're not getting anywhere, talk to your manager. If you're not getting anywhere, talk to this next level. So I always understand that not everybody is going to be comfortable doing that. That is the preferred approach, is to try to talk to the person. But if you are not comfortable, if that takes you out of your comfort zone, and for any number of reasons, maybe you're fearful that you may face some retribution or some retaliation, or it's just out of your comfort zone, there are other avenues for you to handle that. And so you can report it to your management, and you know, or next level of management. So I always like to make it clear it's preferred that you try to resolve it with the person. But if you try and it doesn't work, or it's just out of your comfort zone to address it with the person, then follow whatever your policy says, the process that your policy spells out.
Yeah, and
Any other comment? Oh, go ahead, Jim.
yeah, so that's I appreciate you saying that, because yeah, I mean, I think pretty much not just here at Boys and Girls Clubs, but in most organizations, that's exactly right. It's, you know, you follow the chain of command, the proverbial chain of command. But you know, we do have Stephanie, who is our human resources person, and you know, me as a CEO, and that if you know. And I know the words of saying, hey, we have an open door policy, et cetera, but there is remedial action where you can easily come to one or both of us. That if you're not comfortable either addressing it individually or comfortable to your supervisor, to your manager, to your director, you can always come to Stephanie or myself as well, and we can certainly work with you as well.
Yes, absolutely. And Stephanie, I didn't know if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I think I was going to put this in the chat, but if you ever feel uncomfortable facing a situation head on, you know, I'm a great landing, you know, spot to, you know, as a kind of third party can guide you and help you. Also, Jim or any of your manager or supervisors can help you too. And I, you know, always offer any like role playing or, you know, advice on how to handle a situation.
Absolutely. Yes. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, it was an excellent presentation. I think it was very helpful. And you gave us a lot of good insight and talking points and just ways to think about things and try to make all of us better.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Well, I want to thank you all. Stephanie's going to send you all a copy of the presentation slides. And again, Stephanie, I will include back to, I think it was Marty's comment, some of the data about why diversity is important. And you can feel free to share that with the group as well. So thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know.
That's why when you're doing that, and I have a meeting in there, either we have to move or someone we can even do it virtually.
Yeah.
Because it's so bad.